welcome to another episode of the Being and Doing podcast, where I am inspired by different individuals and their stories, and bringing them in the hope to maybe unlock some unknown parts of your soul, or maybe unlock some new questions which will send you on a new quest. I'm Aleksandra Vanchevska. I'm a psychotherapist in training and STEM scientist. And today I'm joined by another STEM scientist soul, but also a wonderful human being. And that's basically the basic layer, basically the basic layer, but that's the basic layer I'm starting from. It's just her gentleness and as well curiosity. But then on top of those layers, there is the fact that she's a PhD coach and has a podcast which is called Beyond PhD and a newsletter, The Stories of a PhD Ninja. As well as she is an engineer. So she has a PhD in electrical engineering, and on top of that, she currently works in a supportive role in a university, and maybe you will say more about that. And I think she's a dear friend. So there's plenty of things here to explore, and I'm really looking forward to welcome Marija Trajković. Hi.
Oh, thank you. Where do you want to start from? There's so many things.
Yes. Yes, and so we have this is the third take because we had technical issues. So I really hope we'll manage to go through till the end with this one.
Yeah.
But I do
STEM
wanna,
scientists. Sorry,
yeah,
two STEM scientists struggling with mics and videos.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah. So I do well, maybe to start from all of these what I said, where do you draw most of your identity from and what do you identify with mostly? And what are some other things which maybe I haven't mentioned, but you still find some identification with?
Oh, that's a very good question. And really all of it.
Mm.
I wouldn't have been here today if I didn't identify with everything that happened in my journey. So let's say one of my new identities is PhD coach. And as different as that sounds, I also went through a coaching training and coaching certification, which might seem very, very different from everything I have done before. But it was actually the curiosity about human and human interactions, which is what we all deal with at work. Nothing of the results that we publish wouldn't have been possible if we didn't work with other people. And being a PhD coach, having gone through the PhD experience helps me enormously to understand what are the troubles, what's happening, etc. So there is some merge of identities, or even, or maybe like how do you say it, like overflowing from one identity to the other. Yeah.
Mm. Well, I can identify because I just changed my profile name to PhD therapist.
Yay.
And yeah, and I can identify why is it's nice and easier to know which parts need to be supported when one has gone through the experience and walks the talk.
Yeah. Yeah, that helps so much. And that's also something that means to me, full honesty, when I'm looking for my mentors or role models or people I want to work with, I need to feel that the person has been in those shoes, in the shoes where I am right now and can bring me from place A to place B. And that's something that in coaching we were taught you cannot bring somebody further than you have gone yourself,
Mm.
which is for me beautiful because it also pushes me to go beyond where I thought I need to go.
I really resonate with that sentence, to be honest. And I think I don't know if it only applies to coaching, but sometimes the limitations we impose on ourselves are the limitations we will impose to people that are across us. And it's really important for anyone who works with anyone else, basically, to find ways to be a space, a container, but not necessarily putting their own uh,
Yeah.
in, material into the other, but finding ways to really see what that person in front of us really needs.
Yeah.
And that's very challenging. So I'm wondering what supports you in that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, what supports me in that? Different things. Again, my experience, and probably the biggest thing is becoming more aware of my own boundaries and my own perceptions. Because if I'm not aware of my own perceptions, then where do I draw that box for myself and translate that to the other? Then I will not be able to retract from that. So it's actually really the practice of becoming self-aware. Either it's through therapy, through coaching, through different, let's say, self-discovery or self-awareness programs and models, whether it's meditation, yoga, whatever it is. I think it can be really anything if we focus on that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Before, for example, yoga, I used to do it for posture because it would bring me something in the posture, like the form. And now I started focusing more on, okay, what is this form telling me? What's inside? What's the content of the form? And it can be different from day to day. And I also feel how I see things differently and how I get different messages in a way while I'm practicing this.
It's almost the awareness in motion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it's really funny because I just published that what I'm creating is a sanctuary for overachievers, and I remember how I entered yoga as well, like wanting to do the next step, and but then slowly you kind of go into the space of it's the quality of the breath in the movement. It's not about the only the movement itself. But it's not where most of us in these positions, kind of chasing something, start from. It's almost like it needs to be sold as something like that, but that's not what's inside the container.
yeah, yeah. You know, it's funny. It reminds me of dancing because dancing was a big support during my PhD. And when you go to a dance class in Europe, I can say mm, we are focused on steps, on counting, on something that is tangible and visible. And very rarely you would go to a class where people would play music and say, okay, now you dance. In a
Mm,
sense, like don't do the perfect steps, but do whatever dancing means for you, because we have different connotations with it. We have different history with it. We also have different impulse that comes to us and then makes us move it in a certain way.
mm,
So it's very interesting. For example, if we compare cultures where that is a part of their upbringing. So I have friends from Latin America where they say every party you would go to or every family gathering you would go to, it's mandatory. Like there is salsa
yeah.
everywhere. Let's talk about Mexico, for example. And some of them, they accept it as part of their culture. Some of them are like, oh, I cannot stand it anymore. It was forced upon me.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because it came to you when you were a kid and you don't count in your head and you don't like practice it in that formatted way, but it comes somewhere naturally.
Mm,
Whereas here, if we talk about yoga as well, first we need to learn the posture, or in dancing, we need to learn how to step forward and backwards, and then only ease into the substance of it.
mm.
Yeah. And
And
maybe let's translate to a PhD. Maybe
yeah.
that's the same. Like, first, you need to learn how to write a paper, or how to do a presentation, or how to get the form, and then ease into the content.
Yeah, yeah. That's it's interesting because yesterday evening I went to Bulgarian dances, so I love I love traditional dances, and I was sitting with a sense of sadness, a sense of like, wow, look how like the Balkans, especially we are still nurturing that nervous system regulation where we are holding hands. People are screaming, like letting themselves scream when they need to. There is very primal beats. And I'm thinking how saddened I am that this is not more widespread. Not necessarily the Balkan dances, but just this communal way of just being with whatever is, not with how we should look like. And
Yeah.
yeah, translating that into the PG experience, I think there's also something about finding your own way of doing things, and also being connected with just a primal curiosity. Whereas sometimes PhD becomes a performance, and for a lot of people, I think it is only about performance.
Hmm.
Um, but actually, science and doing a PhD is just a natural extension of any one of our innate capabilities in a way.
Absolutely. It's like being a kid all over again. You get to be curious about the world, to explore the things. Whereas if we are focused on the form and how to feel in the form, um, it becomes maybe unnatural then to really feel that fire from within and be
Yeah.
curious and everything. Whereas if you see somebody who is really presenting something they are innately curious about, it doesn't have to be, and really I'm not talking about people who win Nobel Prizes, but really you can be exploring something in your domain that 5 people in the world are interested in, but you are one, and you are one of those 5 people, and you are absolutely curious about it, and you're like, oh look, like this is what we explored. And when that person speaks, you really see the fire, you see this genuine interest, and that person doesn't care that much who is on the other side, if it's going to be 5 people or 500 people
Mhm.
that are interested. Because in science also the timeline is such a huge factor,
Yeah.
especially, well, I can say for myself in electrical engineering, sometimes you have concepts that are way ahead of time that can be put into practice. So the technology is not there to adopt some of the ideas. And
Mm.
yeah, maybe at this point there are 5 people who are interested in what you do, and in 50 years it's going to be 500.
Or 5 million.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So let's backtrack a little bit and structure the conversation in a way that people can get to know your story, but then with each piece of the story, we can see the development of the PhD personality, which they kind of always go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And so what's your journey before even starting the PhD? So you are from Serbia. We're both from Serbia. Um, and then what was in that environment where science is not, it's not a science dominated culture. Um, and so what was in that environment that kind of initially sparked you to embark on this journey?
Hmm. Yeah, in full honesty, I didn't know I wanted to go for a PhD until I was by the end of my bachelor studies.
Mhm.
So let's start with choosing what I wanted to study. Um, yeah, I was always interested in something practical, and I loved physics, I loved maths. So I didn't want to go for one or the other because it seemed very niche in a way. I wanted to have this combo of both, where engineering uses the both to put physical principles using mathematical tools into practice. And this is something that was very cool for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to study electrical engineering. And at that point, actually, when I was initially looking at different departments, I wanted to do biomedical engineering. That
Mm.
was my first goal. So, like, okay, let's put something into practice and let's see how it can be useful for many people. And then once you get to the university, you get to know more details what actually happens there. So biomedical engineering sounds cool when you get to the university, when you get to meet the professors, when you see the enthusiasm, etc. That made me decide for something else
Mm.
because I thought, okay, I don't see the enthusiasm that I had, so I don't want to spend 4 years studying the form and having
Mhm.
no substance, no enthusiasm, no fire in there. And the
Mhm.
closest thing to that was laser technology and nanoelectronics. Because if we look at the underlying technologies, they were very similar. And this is something that was not frequently chosen. We were
Mm.
15 or 20 people on that department.
How many of that were women?
Good question. Maybe a third, actually.
That's interesting.
Five for sure. Yeah.
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 Because I know actually another friend of mine from Serbia, she's doing now we went together to X Lab and she was working with lasers and now she works with Bose-Einstein condensates and nano um informatics basically and quantum basically quantum computers. So it's quite interesting that as you're speaking now, I know two women who are in this field.
Yeah.
Um,
And actually, that's a good point because in Serbia, at the electrical engineering, there were one third of women in general, which is a
mm,
very different case than Western Europe. So where you are and where I am in the Netherlands, um, I can say at TU Eindhoven, where I work part-time now, we have 13% of academic staff who are women.
mm,
Eh,
and that's
if you look at students, that's a higher number, but then you really see how it drops from really bachelor studies, master, PhD, and then stuff really shoots down.
mm-hmm. And interesting when it comes to Serbia, I think I spoke to a poet that lives in the UK, and she was speaking about how when Western feminists were coming to Serbia at the time of Yugoslavia, and they were talking about the liberation, and some of the women, at least in that time, uh, were actually feeling like, "Oh, but we are here." And it's interesting. I think in Serbia there was almost like a dip in the equality, almost like a reversal to something more primal or something more, I would say old fashioned, but it's not the best word. Um, but I think there was something about the way we were grown up to feel like that's a norm, that's fine, that women go to college and it's not yeah, so there is something about that, I think
Yeah,
maybe not yeah,
there's also
say
something about communism, right? That
yeah.
everybody was equal and doesn't matter if you're a girl or a boy, everybody goes to school and everybody's a workforce. So that's
Yes. Yeah, well,
that's the idea.
that's exactly. I mean, there are so many problems which I'm just starting to discover about the communist regime, which basically the way it shaped me and what it means. But I think there are some things that I can see how they shaped me in a way that were beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. For example, for me, it was also very normal to see my mom going to work, my dad also. So it was never, it was normal to say, okay, I can also work one day if I want. And even more than that, it was like, yes, I'm gonna work.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
now I'm happy that I had that example because now I'm getting to a point, okay, choosing for myself if I want to do that or not.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think that may be easier than the other way around. If you're used to like, I'm not working, I'm only um, destined to stay at home, and only discover when you are 30 that maybe you have other opportunities. For sure, that's possible. And I would encourage people, yes, if you realize you want to study when you're 30 or 50, go for it. It really doesn't matter. Or do something else. Yeah. But
Mhm.
it's important that we realize it doesn't matter
Yes, it
when it
doesn't
is.
matter when. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. I agree. And so I stopped you, but basically the step was you are at university studying lasers and
Yeah. Laser
electronics.
technology,
Yeah.
yeah, nanoelectronics. And that was a bit of a science fiction in full honesty. for
Uh-huh.
Serbia at that point. We were 20 people. So it was a very intimate atmosphere. We got to know all the professors, which was really a privilege compared to other departments where, I don't know, programming, you would have 200 people and you are just a number there. But it was popular. It was something that it was easy and secure that you are going to get a job afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for this one, I didn't think too much, okay, what am I gonna do afterwards? You know, my parents would be like, okay, but what are you gonna do? Where are you gonna find a job? You know, like of course they worry if I'm gonna have a safe future. But for me, I didn't worry about it. Like I knew that I'm gonna find a way. Had no idea what that way is gonna be, but I always trusted like, okay, you know, I will switch or I will, if really there is no other opportunity, I will learn something else and find a job. It's not a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I want to stay here for a little bit in that personal space of personal agency and adaptability and trust in oneself and trust in life. I think I'm building that, but I wonder how are you building that and what supports you?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Because before it was unconscious, and
Mm.
I'm sure for you, you had that as well, that maybe
Yeah.
was unconscious because you wouldn't be where you are right now in the middle of London, you know, working there, developing your own things if you didn't trust that you can do it. And for all of us, we do have that. Um, and yeah, it's funny. Then maybe sometimes we let the external pressure get to us
Mm.
and start doubting, oh, whether like this is really how things are supposed to be. Um, and when there is external pressure, maybe it's more based on our safety or sense of belonging there, like what other groups are saying, etc. But I resonate with that I'm still building it. And I think it's a constant work as well. It doesn't mean like, okay, now I have 100% trust and it stays like that for the rest of my life. No, there are going to be things that are happening, and it's also a muscle that we need to maintain.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. I can very much relate to that.
Yeah. And also to,
Mm.
yeah, I always say that believing in something and can be believing in yourself. It's not a 0 and 100%. And you are either here or there, but it's something that you build up. It's really a muscle. It's usually 1% at a time. It's very difficult to start from a low number and be at a very high number very quickly.
Mhm.
But building it slowly, it's maybe we're impatient. Maybe we want to go faster and be like, okay, why is it not happening?
I can relate to that as well.
Yeah. But then it's also important to find environment. So when you ask me what helps me there, it's also finding people around me who can support me in that. So whether it's at work, really at work, it's really important that I see people around me who trust in themselves and then who also trust in people they work with, who give also personal freedom and agency to the individual. And then if that doesn't happen at work, then outside, whether it's mentors, therapist, coach, people we surround ourselves with. Yeah. So for me, it comes from different places, really, like friends, some people at work, my mentors, my therapist, and then ultimately it boils down to myself. It's always myself,
Mm.
but this external element of having a place to go to when you are crashing or where you're like, oh, this is not working, or like
Yeah.
it's never gonna work, and then you look at another person, another environment, something else, and it's like, okay, reassurance, it's fine.
Yeah. I can do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and then the next step is you've done your electrical engineering. You've mentioned that in that time you also explored different options and did undergrad exchanges. Um, and then what then prompted you to do the PhD? What was about the PhD that was appealing, and what uh what got you on that path?
Yeah, I was always curious in general. So also what I chose to study was curiosity to learn something that is new, that is exciting. What professors were teaching there was really state of the art, and I really admire them not having the labs, not having this capacity to show what it means when you translate that into practice, but
Mm.
doing theoretical work and trying to make it as interesting as possible for us. This is, I mean, I'm ever grateful that I had people who were so enthusiastic and so motivated on the other side. And yeah, then during bachelor, I did an internship in Germany. During my master, I went to the UK. So part of my master studies were done in the
I didn't
UK.
know
And
that.
that's the first time I got to put things into practice. Like everything I learned for 5 years in theory, then I entered the lab and I got to see, like photonic integrated chip, optical fibers, to do some basic stuff. Really, now I still remember this moment when I was aligning the optical fiber to the chip. So it's just, I don't know, like basic stuff, when you enter the kitchen and you would wipe the eggs or something like that. But it's so cool when, one thing is reading a recipe, another thing is like doing this actually and feeling it and seeing the result of it, what happens.
Mm.
Yeah, so that was so interesting for me being in the lab. And then I wanted to continue doing that.
Mm.
So when I was in the UK, I
Sorry,
started, yeah.
before you continue, it's exactly the experience I had.
Yeah.
Because I when I my favorite book was at the time the history of the discovery of DNA, although now I have big problems with it, but at the time that was like what was guiding me, and I always was looking at these pictures of Cold Spring Harbor conferences, and just thinking what would these people be discussing in those conferences and how would that look like, and and then I went to the lab, who basically was one of the labs that made these seminal discoveries. And then I
Mm.
finally managed to see how people are thinking in this field, and how does like the actual experimentation looks like, and how are ideas born. And it was really, I just remember that feeling inside of me. I was like, this is it. This is where I want to be. So yeah, it's very similar when you finally have things in your hands, and then you can see them and like, touch them and
Yeah,
make mistakes and not just imagine them. It's just, yeah, it's amazing.
it is. Yeah. Yeah. I also felt like a kid who got a new toy. I was
Yeah,
in the lab and I was like, yes, this is what I always wanted.
yeah, yeah,
Even though fast forward, 5 years later, I remember a moment where I thought, okay, I'm not enthusiastic anymore being in the lab all the time.
yeah, yeah,
And that's fine. I also want to bring this message that there are periods of time when we are super excited about something and then we are all in. And then, I don't know, we get what we needed from that, or we develop another interest, or that translates into something else. And that's totally fine. We are also, yeah, not, I don't see that. For especially for the new generation, that you can work one thing for the rest of your life.
yeah,
Also, when we are developing ourselves and acquiring new knowledge, um, what we discussed before this recording is that, okay, you spend some time in the lab and then you learn that you can transfer this knowledge and you can lead people and you can show others how to do the same because
yeah.
you went through this whole process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And in addition to that, I have a metaphor that an actor, actually, a Serbian actor, shared with me. And I kind of, I really, when he said that, I was like, oh my God, yes, like it's really important to understand these stages. And he said, I had a crisis in my acting career where I was like, as soon as I was approaching the acting stage, I would feel like I want to vomit. Like I felt almost like mučnina, I'm lacking a word, like, but just
Nausea?
feeling nausea. Yeah, exactly. And then he said, and then another famous actor spoke to me, and he said, you know what? It seems that you need a break because the nausea will eventually pass, but if you go on the stage and puke, you will never come back. And it's such a vivid metaphor, but I think it's so important to not allow something to be so to be disgusted by something we like the most.
Yeah.
And I know it for myself because I am kind of in that stage that I feel a really big dissonance, but I know that this is not about the thing. It's about the distance I need to have from it and knowing that I can do other things and then maybe coming back to it with fresh eyes from a fresh angle, with a fresh perspective, and being able to then contribute. But I think there is because now so much of science and I think everything is mixed with that idea of constant productivity or how productivity would look like, which is just kind of something about being constant in something. But
Mm,
actually a lot of times I think in the process one needs to take a step back to look at the whole picture, and then it's much better. You make much better decisions than if you are constantly involved in the nitty-gritty and constantly chewing on the problem.
absolutely. And this reminds me of the period when I was writing my thesis. um, because there was a deadline and you have to like finish before the deadline. So I was nonstop in it. And I remember in the beginning, I was having these ideas and very creative and very enthusiastic, etc. But then when I was spending every day, also including weekends there, I really felt like by chapter, I don't know, 5, my productivity was not productivity, but creativity to put
Mhm.
words into sentences was really like zero. In the beginning, I was like so excited. And what you are describing, I felt that if I would have taken a step back and then come back to it, I would have this creativity and enthusiasm and be and maybe go faster about it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And I want to ask here with your PhD coaching and the podcast, and I really love your posts. So for everyone, really go and look at Maria's writings. They're just amazing. Um, but what is it that you feel is a guiding principle, and what are the ideas that you would like to say to your younger self? That
Mm.
feel like it would be supportive if you knew them when you started.
Yeah, maybe I would expand this to more than my younger self, but generally people who are in the PhD. And it's definitely this message from the beginning, having your personal agency, like trusting in yourself no matter what the professor says or the group decides or group disappears or whatever happens, even if your field is extinct, I don't know, or
Mm,
like nobody's ever again interested in that, you are going to be absolutely fine. There are so many things that you will learn along this journey about being a scientist, about yourself, that it's a treasure that you can translate into whatever you decide to do afterwards. And I
mm,
wish I would hear these words when I was at that point. It was somewhere like I did have this trust, but if somebody would say that to me, like you're gonna be absolutely fine, like look at all the things that you are doing and all the obstacles that you are surpassing, etc., I think I would cry
mm,
from joy, somebody saying something positive.
mm,
Yeah, because also as scientists, we are so focused on finding problems and being very critical. And that can span to other areas of our lives.
yeah,
Not that it can, but it does.
yeah, yeah.
And
And I want to ask you here and maybe add to this, which is that so many scientists somehow undervalue themselves uh, and don't really know how to represent what they have gone through in a way that others will see the value of that. Uh, because it's really funny when, like people in industry are like, oh, you don't have industry experience. And I'm always thinking like, but everything we do in the PhD or postdoc is basically project management. It's people management, and somehow it's assumed that that's not part of the process. And I don't really know why, and I don't know where this bias is coming from, but it does lead to a lot of people I'm surrounded with feeling like they don't know what they have to contribute. And I feel really saddened by that because I worked at TPFL in Switzerland, which is a federal university, and then I work here at the CRIC, which are basically the top world research centers. But
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by people who do not trust in their own capacities. And I
Yeah.
just feel so heartbroken about that. And I wonder, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And first of all, I don't believe in this narrative. So I find it a pity that it's also being put there, that you hear it from companies, especially if you are thinking after a PhD to go to a company and people say, oh, you don't have experience or you don't have this. Um, and it goes automatically. And then we take it upon ourselves and say, oh, I really don't have it. I really don't have company experience. But what does it mean, company experience? So
Mhm.
let's break it down. What does it mean? Does it mean working with people? Because during a PhD, you have to work with people. Does it mean taking care of, as you say, project management? Because yes, you are a project manager of your project. And well, let me talk about engineering. There are nowadays so many projects that involve so many partners that you have to manage. So all these partners who are there, everybody's there for their piece of cake, and you are in the middle, and you want to get your PhD.
You're managing stakeholders, basically.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
And
Let's not only.
not only that, I find it really fun, interesting because when I was a PhD, my one of my project was an intersection between physics and biology, and I was working with the person who was building a microscope. And basically, I had to be the translator of my biological science to someone who is a physicist. And I was able to do that because I was able to finish this project and tell him exactly what I need and find ways for him to understand me and vice versa. So I just find it really funny that that there is this label and this idea that maybe
Yeah,
we don't have the capacities or it's somehow different. And also like the level of, I don't know, expectations, or I mean, they're all there. And even and recently a lot of PhD or scientific environments have become corporate environments,
oh yes.
and they are replicating in a very similar way what's happening in the corporate world with
Yeah,
really good HR processes, onboarding processes, um, structuring of contracts and things like that. So
yeah,
today, I really don't see the difference, but somehow it's still missing from the narrative that,
yeah.
yeah,
And what um what I see here is basically trusting more some external authority.
yeah.
Is that there is this authority, there is a company or a boss of a company, or somebody who is higher, on a higher
Mm,
position than you are, and like giving this authority to the and also agency to the other person. So like, okay, this person knows better than I do, which is absolutely
mm,
not true. Like nobody knows better for the other person. We only us, we know what's good for ourselves. Like I don't know what's good
yeah.
for you, you don't know what's good for me. You can give me advice, and as we talk, like we have our own perceptions and boxes and things where we put experiences and people, etc. But it's also during the PhD as well. We have this professor, and still I feel a lot this inequality.
Yeah.
Like the professor is here and I'm here, and who am I to go against the authority? Who am I to say that I don't have this experience? So if my professor says, or if the company says you don't have experience in a company, who am I to say, oh no, look, this is actually what I have done?
Mm,
And I feel that this is missing a lot. And this is something that I work on with people, so that, you know, during the PhD, let's practice this. Let's practice this during the PhD. Let's break from this cycle and circle that somebody else is going to take care of you. Like believing that once you go in a company, this company will take care of you. Sure thing, absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
You are just one of the employees. And if you don't take care of yourself, whatever you imagine for yourself, mm, yeah, nobody else will do that. And there's also this perception, I'm going to be a good student and somebody else will see and notice what I have done,
Mm.
which then we get disappointed if it doesn't happen. And most likely it will not happen. So let's take this power back to ourselves, that we can go out there and that we can be proud of what we have done. Because I also feel that people find it difficult to brag, quote unquote, about what they have achieved
Mm.
and not embody it and say, okay,
Yeah.
this is what I have done. This is really me. And don't feel it as if something like, oh, I'm bragging, I'm saying too much about myself, I'm being maybe egoistic or whatever it is. Like owning that experience. I really have worked with different stakeholders during my PhD. I really had a shitty onboarding process, or I don't know, like, you know, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody showed me how to sign a contract. Now I'm an expert in signing contracts or whatever it is. It's all like a mini experience that is part of you, and that is also a mini win, something that you have learned throughout the journey. And that all
Mm.
counts, all of it.
And I like the name of your newsletter, which is PhD Ninja, because you do become sort of a ninja in this process, because you do become somewhat a person that is able to quickly troubleshoot, to quickly problem solve, and to also reach out to people when things are not working. So there is a lot of independence that you gain in the process, and it's almost like expected. It's ingrained in the process, but I somehow feel like it's not appreciated by ourselves, and then obviously underappreciated by people who observe us.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so that's really the conclusion. We have to own it before, you know, before we ask others to tap us on the back and say, good job, you have done this. Now you own it. Now you deserve it. Now you
Yeah.
deserve a higher salary, or now you deserve to go to a conference, or now you deserve this. You deserve it at all times. Yeah.
Yeah. And also important is be the ability to ask for what you deserve as well, or
Yeah,
what you perceive to deserve, because I think it's really important to remember that it's not if I do this, then I will deserve this, and then you wait for 5 years until you finish your PhD or your paper to go and present it. And but
exactly.
actually, conferences are a human endeavor, and they are made for us to exchange ideas and not for us to go and present a perfect package that we already solved.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think it's such an important reminder. How did all these things that we go to originated?
Yeah. No, I find the PhD period a beautiful period because
Mm.
majority of people do that in their mid-20s.
Yeah,
So it's a period when you are, you know, you're out of your teenagehood, you
yeah,
enter adulthood, you have some money, you are living somewhere else, you are becoming a very independent person who is deciding for herself or himself what you are gonna do with your life.
yeah,
And you get also a lot of freedom there to experiment and play. But unfortunately, we don't always see it like that. So we
yeah,
get caught up in, okay, let me write this perfect paper or this perfect conference. Or as you say, like just go and practice during a conference or during a colloquium in your group, saying some things that are not perfect because, yeah, such thing doesn't exist.
mm-hmm.
And what fascinates me, for example, now looking at the startup culture, because I used to work in a startup last year, and then I was looking what is happening in the European startup culture, what is happening in the American startup culture. In the US, nobody's taking you seriously until you had 3 startups that failed.
Mm.
So they want you to fail. They want you to feel uncomfortable, to see how it is, and to manage to go on the other side. Whereas
Mm.
in Europe, we are like, no, 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 do the perfect thing, do the perfect startup and tell me that you have succeeded. And this
Mm.
translates to everything else afterwards, like write a perfect paper. Don't bring me like this, I don't know, this
Half-baked.
draft that it's like, huh, what is this?
Yeah.
But there is no such thing. Also, paper is a work in progress. Uh, you know, sometimes we also expect we are going to send it to the professor and the professor is going to say, oh, look, a good job. But there's always going to be something to add.
Yeah.
It's also a bit like a painting, like a piece of painting.
Yeah.
You can always work on it, but ultimately sometimes you decide, okay, now this is complete for
Yeah.
this cycle, and maybe I will write another paper or do another painting and
Yeah.
and express something else in there.
Yeah, and I want to highlight what you said because I think there's so much misconception that PG has to be hard, it has to be a gruesome process that you suffer through. It was there were hard patches in my PhD, and as well in my postdoc, much harder. But I really feel that it, to some extent, we can choose if we find our agency, and I think it's really about finding agency to make it a good process when we know what our rights are. And I think it's so important for young people and young adults to be informed about that. Because I think one thing about the PhD environment is that it looks like it's not a job, but it's
Mhm.
actually most of the time our first real job.
Absolutely.
And I think taking into account that is a job, we need to know what is the contract we are signing and are we happy to sign that contract?
Yeah,
And what does it mean? And what is our agency within that contract? And who are the people who are enforcing it? Because oftentimes we think we are employed by the professor, but actually we are employed by the institution. Therefore, the
exactly.
professor is not an omnipotent person. The
Exactly.
institution still exists. So there are so
Exactly.
many things that I feel like is really important to remind people who are entering this process because it can feel quite isolating when we are locked into this group and feeling like this is what I have to stick with. And sometimes
Mhm.
changing the group might be the best thing that can happen to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that's very important what you said. Like being hired by the institution, by the university, by the institute, whatever it is. If it doesn't work out in one group, there are ways to go to another group, to go
Yeah.
to another institution, university. I
Yeah.
know people who have quit their PhD, who have started another one, who have quit and never started another one. It's all fine. Like it
Yeah.
really
And you're
it,
not a failure.
no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And it can be also it can be that the contract you have signed is not what you hoped for. So maybe people are not like the relationship between people is not what you wanted and not the place where you like to work,
Mhm.
and that's fine to admit and go somewhere else. If
Yeah.
this environment cannot provide you that, okay, which environment can?
Yeah.
And maybe you realize also halfway that okay, PhD sounded cool, but then halfway you realize maybe this project where I am is not that cool, or like what I wanted to get out of it, I wanted to work in a lab, I never went into a lab, or I wanted to go to a company, I never went to a company as like
Yeah.
a partner. Or there are some things that we expect that are not present, and then you see, ask yourself, okay, is this really going to be like this for the rest of my PhD? Because if
Yeah.
yes, and I'm not getting it, what's the point?
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I think it's really important to see it as a living, breathing organism rather than something that's fixed, and we cannot change. What else would you like to add to this topic of doing your PhD? And maybe what were some hurdles that you've had to overcome? What were the main learnings that you had from your PhD journey?
Yeah, main learning, I think, is that it's all about people.
Mm,
Um, it's all about people we work with, and it sounds like it's a project that's written on a paper that you are gonna execute, and it doesn't matter who is on the other side, but it's actually so important
yeah,
who are the people there. Oh my God.
yeah,
So for
yeah.
me, what my PhD looked like, it was between two countries. So
Mm,
it was a university in the Netherlands and a company in France. And the biggest hurdle in the beginning was establishing trust between people
mm,
because it was a university and a company, and it was written by other people, and those people retired, and then this project ended up on a table of somebody else who didn't even know what it's about. So it was understanding what's supposed to be done, and then those people, they got the money. They ended up in a project together, but it was a form, and the content was like, okay, I'm in a company, I need to protect my IP. And people at the university were like, okay, we want to do something exciting, let's see what we can do. But there was no link of trust there. So that was really the biggest hurdle, and that's all about people.
mm.
So we have to establish trust between people. It's not between organizations. Ultimately, yes, because people are a part of the organization, but it's mainly between those people who are working on that specific project.
And I really like the use of word trust, and I will just add the word safety, trust and safety. I have been working in environments where I felt utterly unsafe, and it really cuts all your creativity and all your basically wish to contribute. And it's really important. I mean, if there is one thing that I want to contribute with, is kind of forming ooh, forming trauma-informed environments
Mm,
where we know what it means to create safety, and from that safety that people can bring the best selves um to create something together, and from also a very choiceful place.
yeah.
um yeah,
Yeah, those two things, if they don't exist, like trust and safety in a work environment, I would say run.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, either if there's the possibility to work on that, great. You are also an agent who can bring a change. So
yeah.
this is something that I want to bring to people, is that you can be a change agent.
Mm,
And that it's a question, do you want to do this? But you have so much power, and this
yeah,
is really absolutely true. Who you are, how you bring yourself, what you want this environment to be, because it's an ever-changing environment that depends on the people. A
yeah,
group can be looking one way when you have one group leader, and looking totally the other way when there is another group leader and same people below.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So also bringing something to the table yourself when you're a PhD, because you have a say in there. You don't have to be a professor to know it all. And, this conception that when you are a professor or when you have the PhD degree, then you have the right to say or do something. No, like just you being there and your existence is enough to bring the ideas that you want to cultivate.
I really like this. I really, really like this. And what is there anything else that you kind of want to add to this PhD journey story?
Just the words of encouragement, really, to say you're doing a good job. You're doing a great job. I mean, first of all, everybody who decided to do a PhD did it because they believed there is something in it for them. They believed in themselves. They believed that they are gonna get through it. They believed in something. So you are already doing a great job, even if it seems like it sucks at the moment. And even if it seems like you're gonna quit, it's great. It's like whatever you have gone through this point, it's good. Maybe it doesn't look like it at this moment, but yeah, I want to encourage people that there is no right or wrong. There's only like what works for them and what doesn't, and that's very individual.
And I just want to add to that, and whatever you've gained through what you have done until now has value, and you
Yeah,
are valuable. Although maybe for now you can't see it, but there are people who are going to see you.
yeah, yeah,
Mm,
absolutely.
mm. And then I want to explore a little bit of uh, all of you, as in like not only the PhD, but I know you are doing a lot of mountaineering, dancing, movement. You have done the coaching. Um, Maybe I want to check what did the coaching bring you, and what are the kind of things that this process, going through this process, kind of opened up in you?
Yeah. Oh, so many things. Um, One of the very big things was active listening. That is one of the
Mm,
core competencies that as a coach you need to have. And I mean, it's a totally different level than how I used to do that before, because we have this impression that we're listening to the other person, but actually most of the times we're just waiting for the person to stop talking so that we can answer the ideas that we have in our head while the person is talking. It's like, oh yeah, yeah, this reminds me of this and that. Da, da, da. And
mm,
as a coach or a therapist, you have to be totally clean of your own thoughts and ideas and what comes, and just be there available for the other person.
mm,
Yeah,
mm, mm,
that's really huge. And what else it brought me is just the process of going through it was one of the rare times that I consciously went through the process, realizing that it's not about the result. It was really about the process. It was really about learning what it means to be a coach, practicing, failing, getting upset about it, getting frustrated with it. Um, and, arriving till the end and saying, okay, it's really not the end, like you get the license, but it's not the end. It's just the
no.
beginning.
Yeah.
Even though you work with people and everything, like it's just the beginning. And in 10
Mm.
years from now, it's still going to be a beginning of something else that comes for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then what about the mountaineering and the dancing? And I don't know, there are many things about you that I'm sure I don't even know about.
Yeah. Well, those two things, let's start with dancing because that happened
Mm,
earlier when I started my PhD. I started dancing at the same time. And it's also because I wanted to do this forever. But when I was growing up, let's say in my family, there were no means to go for dance classes. So
mm,
it was really somewhere on my list, like, okay, when I will have the means to do it, this is like gotta be a to do on my list.
mm-hmm.
And the moment has come when I started my PhD, and I was so happy. Yeah. Um, just because music makes me move,
Yeah.
and I have chosen salsa because that's the kind of music where I hear it. I'm like, okay, where is it? Where? I'm gonna move.
Yeah.
I cannot sit
It's
still.
like
Like,
you have an antenna. Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
I have for example, I have a problem when I go to traditional dancing concerts. I get anxious because there's so much energy that's started, but like you kind of need to sit and watch the concert. I'm like, this is not for me. I need to be the participant.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, exactly what you say. So now when I go to some concerts that I know that there's gonna be some beats that I like, I'm like, okay, no, no, if this is a seated concert, this is not gonna work. Like there has to be
Exactly.
an area where you can stand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I have to say, dancing helped me tremendously during PhD. And this is a concept that I learned from my mom. She used to say all the time, like, you give your mind a rest by exhausting your body,
Mm.
and vice versa. You give your body a rest by exhausting your mind. And they're like so connected.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's something that I grew up with, this movement, either through sports. Either we used to go to the village basically every weekend. So, doing some farming, agriculture. This is something that I grew up with, and I'm also immensely grateful that I had this opportunity. But it means so much when you are just engaged with this, as you mentioned, like primal movement, some primal
Mm.
things, whether it's like touching the ground and planting something in the ground, or it's dancing, because that's also something primal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or it's sport, like throwing a ball. That's also something very, very, very ancient.
Yeah. 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 And then climbing mountains.
Yeah, mountaineering. Oh, it started in COVID times.
Hmm.
That was the only place where you can be, or you could be outside, like 1 meter away from people. And I found such peace there.
Hmm.
Now I love going to uh, the Alps or the Pyrenees
Oh, yeah.
in Europe, because at a certain point when you climb, like there is also this nature that changes. Like in at the bottom, you see lakes and rivers and flowers and butterflies and animals and, like a very vivid life. And then you start climbing a bit up. And at a certain point, there's no more green anymore, and there are less trees, and it becomes bushy, and there are less insects as well. There
Yeah.
is a certain point when you go and there is no sound, really, like almost like you're in vacuum. And
Mm.
this moment is something I appreciate a lot. The fact that you are disconnected, like there is no mobile connection, the fact that there are no insects buzzing around, and then you really hear absolute stillness between here and here. It's like, and
Mm.
everywhere, everywhere. It's not only in your mind, but like everywhere where you are, it's totally, totally still.
Mm.
And just being away from your daily life. Yeah, I'm gonna give this example. I went with some friends hiking. Like we met in Munich, and part of the group stayed in Munich, and the other half went hiking. And we were in a mountain for 5 days. When we came back, it was such a different energy. Like you could feel how was the energy of the city, of this everyday, what was happening, um, all the worries, all the busyness of the city, and what it meant to get yourself out of that environment, find some peace, reconnect with yourself, reconnect with nature, and come back to it.
Yeah.
And also, I remember my mind was saying, like, these are the worries that we have in the city. That's very interesting, because I was like 5 days away from it, and then they evaporated, and my mind was not a worry anymore. And then coming back to it, you really see it like from the outside, because you see these people who stayed for all the time in the environment, and you have yourself that you displaced yourself from it and now come back and reunite. So
Mm.
yeah, that was very interesting.
Mm. I really, yeah, I resonate because I lived in Switzerland, but also I was hiking when I was in Serbia as well. That's one of the things I'm really grateful that my dad was always, although at the time when we were going, like, I was really angry. He's taking me there away from my friends. But I'm actually now really grateful that I had that because I almost can kind of feel, I know the smell of different layers. And it's really somehow it just brings a different me. It's almost like you're by being in contact with that part of the world, I'm in contact with something in me that brings out, and I
Yeah,
feel like I go for that. I go for myself to remind me
yeah,
of that
yeah,
part that you can somehow forget in the city. Although I love the city, but
yeah,
yeah, it's just so important to,
it is.
yeah.
And what struck me last year, I was hiking in the Pyrenees, and some of the other mountaineers, they were discussing like, how old is the mountain? And then we discovered it's 60 to 80 million years old.
Yeah.
And then I continued hiking, just looking around and thinking, this has been here 60 million years ago.
Yeah,
It's mind-blowing,
it
really
is.
mind-blowing. And then you get to walk there and be part of it as well.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Hmm. I'm almost feeling we reached the peak.
We climbed
Um,
so high that now there is no sound anymore.
yes, exactly. And it does feel like a space where I don't really need words anymore, but I'm wondering if there is anything for you that feels like left unsaid or untouched.
No, I also feel like we have said everything there is for this moment.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure we will have many more conversations,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Thank you very much for the opportunity and for this lovely conversation.
And I'm wondering one last question, which I love to ask, which is there an absurd thing about you that not many people know about, something that you wouldn't connect with the Maria you see, but actually is part of you?
It's part of me, yeah. It's a hobby that I did in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I used to do a sport shooting.
Ooh, yes, definitely. This is exactly what I'm aiming for.
Exactly. Yeah, I used to do it for almost 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And I was a part of a national team as well. When I was in junior, I was competing as junior. Yeah.
Tell me more. So, what did what did this bring out in you, and what is I think it brings out a really important part of us, which especially as women we may kind of shy away from. I don't know, the word ruthlessness comes to mind, but I don't know if that's anyway present. But I'm curious.
Yeah, actually, yeah, when I say this to people, they're like, oh, like, oh, it has to be very like anger releasing. And it's actually very
Mm-hmm.
the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you do that, you need to be absolutely in peace and calm
Mm-hmm.
uh, in your heart. Like, really, if your heart is racing, you also feel that when you're holding. I used to shoot with air rifle.
Mm-hmm.
So you feel it like at certain point when you get to the point of stillness, you can even like notice how it moves with your heartbeat. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in your mind, because you are competing, usually it's 1 hour and a half, the match during competition, and you have 40 shots, which are being then calculated, added. And it's all the same, all the same, all the same. So if you in your mind you get in a chatter like, oh, this is not gonna work, oh, what am I doing? Da, 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 it really influences immediately your performance.
Yeah.
And here I saw how important it is to be okay with your thoughts in your head. And what
And
it
be
brought
embodied.
me, yeah.
Mm.
And what it brought me is extreme focus and concentration
Mm.
because you have to be focused on that one target for 1 hour and a half
Mm.
and over again. It's like it's a very repetitive thing,
Mm-hmm.
but there is also this beautiful moment where it can become almost like a meditation.
Yeah.
Because in meditation, you also repeat just focusing on the breath, and it is kind of the same thing.
Mm. And I'm also sitting with how many people are not trained in that way to hold a gun, and therefore how much problems there are because of that. Because it sounds like, I'm just sitting with it can be a useful weapon if you're doing it from a clear stance. But as soon as it's in the hands of someone who is afraid, who is kind of manic in their thinking or their being, it will reflect on how they use it as a weapon, if it makes sense what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. And I will I would like to refrain from the word weapon because it's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
it's a sport in
yeah,
this regard, and it's one of the oldest sports. Well, because
yeah,
before we used to do it to feed ourselves,
yeah, yeah,
and
exactly.
uh, and now it's also a sport. It's an Olympic sport as well
Mm.
for the longest time. And I did
Mm.
have friends who wanted to use this as anger release, and
Yeah.
used to bring them to training, as you say, it would be a disaster.
Yeah.
Because they would be like shaking all the time and like, okay, now I'm gonna really sell my anger, and then even
Mm.
missing a target, and then getting even more angry. Like, how did this happen? Like I thought all of this anger is gonna be channeled to the center.
Mm.
Doesn't work like that, you know?
Yeah. Which is then really, really talking about anger, and that it needs something else, that it needs a different kind of holding than what we usually channel it through.
Oh wow, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and also being
Mhm.
in a way being okay with it, like whatever comes there you have to be okay with it, because as soon as you try to be like, okay, no, this part I don't like it, it's not serving me, like go away, go away, go away, then it keeps coming back to you. Yeah.
Mm.
Now I see it, really it's an amazing tool to do
Yeah.
introspection. And at that time I was a teenager when I was doing it, and there were a lot of people who were in a senior category in a national team. And I remember one guy who was talking about mindfulness all the time and connecting like mindfulness to shooting. And it was so fascinating for me. At that point, I didn't dive deep
Yeah.
into it, but it was always fascinating to see like how he approaches it, how he comes to like clean his mind, to be clean, to come and
Mm.
perform this also meditative state of
Mm.
competition.
Mm. It's a really nice way to end, I feel. And I'm really glad I've met this part of you, which I didn't know about. It's really I am amazed by the mosaic you are.
We all are. Yeah.
And we all are. Yeah.
Exactly. There is so much to explore and so much also to bring in and say, okay, this is also a part of me.
Yeah.
And this used to be a part of me. I mean, this used to be me at that point. Now it's a part of me. It's a part of my
Yeah.
past. It brought me something.
Do you still do
Even
it?
no, no.
Yeah.
Even if I don't do it anymore, I'm perfectly happy. Like there was this moment when you're like, okay, you feel like it's approaching its end,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't want to let go of this identity, to leave it in the past. Yeah.
Oh,
And then when I made peace with it, like, okay, I'm really in peace that it stays in the past and it used to be a part of me. Then you're okay when people come and ask, oh, but you're not doing it anymore. Like, what happened? This is you. How come? And you're peaceful that this used to be you until now, but now there's space opening for something else.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. And luckily there is space opening for
Yeah.
something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, thank you for you and thank you for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Alex.